We're going to need them off and on, right?
Yeah.
If you haven't heard Brian Desborough before, means that you weren't here last August. If you don't know who he is now, you won't forget him after you hear what he's got to say. New information comes out of this guy every time we talk to him. Today he's going to talk about a subject I've never heard him talk about, and I think you're going to find it interesting, perhaps controversial, but then what the heck? That's what you're here for, right? So please give him the usual. And really back again, Brian Desborough.
Thank you. And you thought I was just another pretty face, didn't you? Yeah, as Dean said, this is going to be a, controversial subject. It may take you out of your comfort zone, but that's good, I think. And don't take a word I said for granted. Do your own research on this. This is why I'm going to be doing this lecture for you. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in a cave in Wadi Qumran in 1947 by two Bedouin herdsmen subsequently created a cottage industry for biblical scholars. To date, more than 14,000 books and articles on the Dead Sea Scrolls have been written. And the consensus of opinion by these various authors is that the ruins at Qumran are the remains of a monastery in which the Essenes wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls. And furthermore, they claim that the Essenes hid the scrolls in the caves when they were forced to flee from the monastery at the beginning of the Jewish revolt, which began in 66 AD. Incidentally, there won't be time to take any questions this morning. Save your questions for the workshop. Incidentally, this, what I'm reading from now in my notes here, this is from a paper I wrote on the Dead Sea Scrolls that was peer-reviewed by two Dead Sea Scrolls scholars. Obviously, though I don't profess to be a biblical scholar, this is a scholarly subject, so it's only professional to have such a paper peer-reviewed. If so many scholars are in general agreement concerning Qumran, why should you bother to attend my workshop this evening? Simply because I contend that the research of these biblical scholars is terribly flawed. According to my research, which took about 5 years of my spare time, the religious beliefs of the Essenes, or any other sectarian group of that era, for that matter, would have prevented them from ever occupying Qumran because it was definitely ritually impure. Furthermore, I suggest that the scrolls were not deposited in the caves until 200 AD at the very earliest. Incredibly, the claim that the scrolls were written at Qumran is solely based upon the presence of the scrolls in the nearby caves and the discovery of two inkwells in the ruined structure. This is analogous to a detective being assigned to a mansion to investigate a homicide and deciding that the butler did it while ignoring evidence that clearly indicated that the butler didn't do it. This is why we should not rely on the dogma of academic experts and should instead do research for ourselves. And I really encourage you to think the unthinkable and keep asking why. The moment, as you know, there's a lot of poverty in the world, but not all the poverty is of the physical knowledge. There's a tremendous poverty of knowledge, which is devoid of false dogma. And from the cradle to the grave, we're totally bombarded with a sea of misinformation, much of it deliberately so. And so I'd like to digress for about 5 minutes from the subject and just go through one or two things we normally, or subjects, we normally take for granted, and they can really lead us astray. For instance, Madame Blavatsky, the theosophist, according to all the theosophical literature, they would have us believe that she was in communication with ascended masters. And yet, in her private communication to her sister, She freely admitted that these were simply nicknames that she gave to all the high-level Masonic funders of the Theosophical movement. And in fact, later on in life, she wrote to Charles Sutherland, who was one of the co-founders of the Theosophical movement, bitterly complaining because channelers were claiming to be channeling these ascended masters who never existed. For instance, I'll name you a few of them. Master Kohan, that was the Maharaja Baba Kem Singh, and he was noted for his drunken orgies. Another one, Sirdar, it's a strange name, Majithia. He was Master Jewel Ko. Master Hilarion was a Cypriot by the name of Uton Liato. Master Kudhumi was Sirdar Singh Sandawalia. And Ranbir Singh was Master Maria. So these are all very, very wealthy people and were her main supporters financially. Madame Blavatsky was also a member of an Illuminati subgroup known as the Brotherhood of Luxor, very, very satanic, and she was a very high initiate of it. To give her credit, though, she was undoubtedly one of the most brilliant intellects of the 19th century. I won't take that away from her at all. But I think basically one of her, the reasons for her being thrust into the limelight was to provide a lot of misinformation to stop people really researching etheric energy and how to harness it, because that's a threat to the powers that be that run the world. Another thing that really concerns me at the moment is the tremendous emphasis given on these kids who are supposedly called indigo children. Now, if you look at the characteristics of them, and supposedly the authors and lecturers in the New Age circuit claiming, these are a new breed of children. If you look at what their characteristics, they have above average intelligence. They have attention deficit disorder, they're hyperactive, and they've got additional DNA codons, about 4 more than the rest of us. Well, these are all the classic symptoms of children who've been subjected to very intensive mind control, usually in kindergarten or in Sunday school. And I have positive proof that the CIA is heavily involved with the indigo children movement. So I think it's really time for a grand jury to be convened and put these people who are promoting the indigo children in front of it, and let's get to the bottom of the whole thing. It's very serious. I would point out, in regard to that there are networks of daycare centers that are created throughout the country just specifically to program people with, or kids with advanced intelligence. So if you do have a child of your own in kindergarten of any kind, check it out and make sure that it's legit. Another area of misconception, really, what is the origin of angels? Could I have a slide one, please? Incidentally, I'd like to thank Dean and also his staff for the great assistance they've given me the 2 times I've been here. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, this is, I showed this one actually at the last conference here. Great. Where did I put my? Oh, thank you. I'm still in a state of rigor mortis until about 10 o'clock every morning. So, yeah, what we have here is a phrase referring to one specific person. Originally, the Sumerian language, the pictographs were very specific, only meant one object only. This is actual Sumerian writing from a slightly later period when it became more stylized. What you see on the end there is the word Li, L-I. And originally, this was just a picture of a shrub, and it was vertical, and later on they made it horizontal. But what you really have here at this point is the foliage, here's the trunk, and here are the roots. This is the word of, originally. This is the person's name, N-E-N. This is the word dinger. And what it means, when you have dinger in front of a person's name, it means that person is a lord or a member of nobility anyway. And what this means is Lord of Agriculture. Now, after 2 or 3 centuries went by, this word of became also the word for heir. And then it became suddenly Lord of Heir, even though originally this person, N, was Lord of Agriculture. So now this word heir is Lil, L-I-L. So here is Enlil. That's where it came from. But it meant that Enlil was the person that gave agriculture to the Sumerians. Next slide, please. Now, the Phoenicians, according to my research, the flood and the Ice Age occurred simultaneously 6,800 years ago. And some of the flood survivors were Aryans that we now know as Phoenicians, who survived by being at the top of Mount Hermon, which is on the border of Israel and Syria. And Lebanon is right on the corner there. And what happened was that as the floodwaters receded, they established a high-level grassy area called Eden, and established a little village there called Karshag. And the lady who really ran it was Nin Karshag. This is being erroneously written up now in books as Nin Harsag, but it's really Nin Karshag. After a while, there was a disastrous fire there, and they migrated to Sumeria. Now, they had a lot of technology, and so to the Sumerian native people, they were looked upon as gods because one in particular showed them how to plow. And this was a person called Taz-Miki-Kel. And here he is. What you have here, as you see, signifying agriculture, you have the grapes. Over here are stalks of barley. And down here is the plow that he showed them how to plow with. And he was also known as just Taz, Tashio, and Tashi, and also Mikal. Next slide, please. Here are very early Phoenician coins. And as time went on, after he died, he was deified. And so Mikal suddenly had wings because they suddenly figured he was Lord of the Air, just as Enlil was the same thing. As Enlil and Taz-Miki-Kel are one and the same person, really. And because he's suddenly Lord of the Air, the superstitious natives decided, well, if he Lord of the Air, he must be able to fly, and therefore he has to have wings. And here we have him, in fact. Here we go. Here's Taz-Miki-Kel with the wings, or Mikal. You see the wing? Now the Phoenicians, and it's a thing that's been written out of the history books all over Britain on a lot of the monoliths, stone monoliths. You'll see Phoenician writing stating that they came here 2900 BC. They built Stonehenge. And earlier this century, until the words were eroded, there was one of the horizontal stones at Stonehenge actually had Phoenician writing on it. And then in about I think it was about 14 or 1500 BC, King Barat of the Phoenicians, that was a senior clan, really colonized Britain. That's where the word Brit comes from, because in the Phoenician language they didn't have vowels, so it was BRT, Brit. And that's where Britannia comes from, Baratania, and from Barati, which was their sea goddess. Next slide, please. And so here are pre-Christian British coins. And what do we have on this one? Here it is. Oh, can you turn that one over, please? Yeah, flip it. Yeah, straight over. Yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah, here it is here. And what do we see? Tashi, Taz-Miki-Kel, same person. This is Archangel Michael. You see the wings? And here's the Phoenician sun cross, because they were solar worshippers. And up here, here's Archangel Michael again. And the interesting thing there is, bearing in mind that Taz-Miki-Kel, or Mikal, or Michael, originally was their god of agriculture, or lord of agriculture. Today, in church in Britain, we celebrate Harvest Festival on Michaelmas Sunday. it's Michael. This is nothing to the angelic community as such is a fiction. Now, some people claim they've had visions of angels. Where does that come from? Well, in my last lecture, I mentioned that Carl Jung determined that there were etheric entities that have the ability, when the geomagnetic stress level in your vicinity is correct, they can then materialize. And when they materialize, they scan your subconscious and will materialize in a form that's acceptable culturally to your subconscious. And so if you if you're a peasant, they would appear as a pixie. If you're a Catholic, they'll appear as the Madonna or an angel, and so on and so forth. And so this is the thing you're going to have to research yourself, because there's very little's ever been written on that subject of that kind of entity. Anyway, let's get back to the scrolls. As you see, this is why it's so important to do your own research and don't rely on academic experts all the time, because they can get you into trouble. Could I have the next slide, please? What I'm going to show you here doesn't show up very well. You can get a lot of information on old structures if you just face the wall and ask why. Of course, you've got to do this when nobody's around, otherwise men in white coats will come along and take you away. But let's ask the question why on this one. That's as bright as it will get, will it? Yeah, it's not showing up too well. Anyway, what we have here, if you could see the original photograph or the actual wall, this is the southeast corner of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And down here, the stones have a very rough convex surface on the front face. Over here, they're all smooth. So let's ask ourselves why. In the Hasmonean era, about 2nd century BC, at that time, the standard method for the stonemasons to finish the stone block was to have a rough convex surface. Then Herod came along, and Herod was a great builder of buildings all over Judea. And he changed the style to very flat front-facing, and that you can see them over here. They're very flat, whereas here they're actually convex. And so that tells us this was built in the 2nd century during the time of Simon the Hasmonean. And over here is Herod. Now, Simon the Hasmonean is very germane to our subject, because he was the only ruler in Judea that was both the monarch and also the high priest at the same time. It gave him a lot of political power. And he was held in very high esteem by the Jews, and the reason being that during his reign they had a tremendous earthquake which leveled almost all of Jerusalem. And so he rebuilt what is now known as Upper Jerusalem, just from scratch. So he was really well liked. However, when we look in the scrolls, we see that there was Simon the Hasmonean's era was a time of wrath, and they kept referring to the wicked priest. And I couldn't find in any written material on the scrolls at all by any biblical scholar why Simon the Hasmonean would be regarded as the wicked priest. So I had to do a lot of research. And what I found was that about a half a mile south of the Temple Mount, there used to be Mount Zion. It really wasn't a mountain, but it was a very, very high hill. And this was the holiest place, basically, in Judea. And the reason for that is that the priesthood regarded Mount Zion as the navel of the earth. In other words, it was the principal chakra of the earth's energy grid. Well, Simon made a boo-boo, really. He, in building the Upper Jerusalem area after the quake, he needed a lot of fill dirt to fill in some of the ravines. So he literally leveled Mount Zion to the ground. It's not there anymore now. And so, you know, this was an absolute no-no as far as the priesthood was concerned. And that's one of the reasons why some of the priesthood left the temple in disgust and created the Essenes in Babylon. And this is an area, there are other reasons which I'll go into in the workshop, but that's one of the reasons how the Essenes became formed. And so again, as I say, no biblical scholars ever looked into this, and this is why you really got to do your own research if you want to find out the truth about things. Herod was, as I mentioned, was a great builder all over Judea. Somewhat ruthless, he supposedly murdered his favorite wife and his two stepsons. There's absolutely no historical evidence that he ever murdered the male babies, as the New Testament would have us believe. Where did they get the story from? Well, at the time the Jews were in exile in Babylon, Buddha had just died, and his disciples went to Babylon to do some evangelical work. And the story they brought with them, which is obviously apocryphal, was that King Bimbisara's advisors advised him that a baby had just been born, it was a boy, and would finally attain more power than he had. So he ordered the death of all male babies. And so Buddha's parents fled with baby Buddha to a foreign country, and then were told at the age of 12 he astounded the priest in the temple. He had an incident later at the well, and then he was tempted by the devil on a mountain, and then he ascended, I think at the age of 30, if I remember correctly. And that's where basically the authors of the New Testament, I believe, got that story. Next slide, please. This is the Temple Mount. The Arabic term for it is Haram-esh-Sharif. Here's the Dome of the Rock, and that's the third most sacred place in Islam. This is the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is the second most holy place. And of course, at the moment, and this is all the Temple Mount is huge. I think it's about 44 football fields in size. And at the moment, as you probably are aware, religious fundamentalists, both Christian and Jew, want to blow up the Dome of the Rock, and because they're claiming this is where the original Herod's and Solomon's temple, they were both located just here. And so we're in a very, very serious situation right now. Why do they want to blow them? Why would they want to destroy it and build the temple when they would know that if this occurred, immediately you're going to get into a nuclear holy war with the Arabs? Well, back in the 19th century, Albert Pike, who was a very, very high-level Masonic and Illuminati member, developed a scenario for 3 world wars. And the first 2 world wars came exactly at the time he predicted they would, and also for the reasons that he wanted. And then there was the Third World War, which will occur very soon. It'll have to occur before about 2010, when the New World Order government is scheduled to be established. And he stated that the purpose of this war, and of course this is not prophecy, this is what he wanted on behalf of the global powers at the time in the 19th century. And so the idea was they would have to bring a lot of Jews into Palestine, because Orthodox Jews didn't want to come here. And so they had to come up with a ploy to get a resettlement of Jews in Palestine, and then the war would start with the war between a holy war with the Jews and Arabs, and then after that, all the other countries in the world would join, would take sides, and the war would be so horrific that at the end of it, they'll be so disappointed with Orthodox religion that they would then embrace the global powers religion, which is the religion of Lucifer. And so this is all coming to pass, and I want to go into this deeply in the workshop, because the Christian fundamentalist leaders and the Jewish fundamentalist leaders are not adversaries in this. They're working in a very, very close alliance. Millions and millions of dollars are being pumped into this venture to blow up the Dome of the Rock. And it couldn't really occur until Ariel Sharon became Prime Minister of Israel. And so it's a very, very serious situation we're facing. Now, of course, every biblical scholar just assumes that the Temple of Solomon, the Temple of Herod, was here. According to my research, it wasn't. And so they're chasing moonbeams. And so the only way we can really stop this war from occurring is to educate the young Israelis and also young Christians that, what the truth really is about the Temple Mount. And I'll tell you in the workshop what the Temple Mount really was. And all the history's back there, it's just people have forgotten it. So this ties in directly, in fact, with the Dead Sea Scrolls. Next slide, please. If you're wondering what it looks like under the Temple Mount, it's hard to see. These are aqueducts to store rainwater. They're just huge. And the whole of the Temple Mount is just honeycombed with tunnels. Next slide. Very important person in history. This is the 19th century. This was the artist for a London magazine at the time, came here and under the Temple Mount and actually painted this on the spot. And this is Sir Charles Warren. And Sir Charles Warren is the only archaeologist that's ever explored and drawn a map of what's under the Temple Mount. And you know him by another name, which I'm going to go into. And Sir Charles Warren, after he finished his archaeological work, became the chief of the London Metropolitan Police, and also the founder of the Quater Coronati Masonic Lodge. Quater Coronati Lodge is the research lodge for all Freemasonic lodges in the world. Comes second only to the United Grand Lodge of England, which is the mother lodge of all Masonic lodges. So it's very, very powerful. And as it happens, the person who was the chief statistician and authority on rituals for the Quater Coronati Lodge at the time of Sir Charles Warren is here today, and that's my very good friend Arizona Wilder. She's the great-granddaughter of the authority on rituals. Arizona's in the front row here, and she has her workshop coming up on Sunday, and she's going to tell you some very interesting things. Incidentally, she will be talking about the real location of Atlantis, which wasn't in the Atlantic Ocean. So please attend her workshop. I think you'll get some interesting information from her. Anyway, at the time Sir Charles Warren became chief of the London Metropolitan Police, the Duke of Clarence, who was the son of King Edward VII of Britain, was very keen on painting. He wasn't very bright, but he was very fond of doing portraits. And he had an artist model from the East End of London by the name of Alice Mary Crook. She worked in a clothing store there. And to the horror of the royal family, they found that the Duke of Clarence had secretly married her. And they had a child, and the problem was that she was Catholic, and it's against the law for any member of the monarchy of Britain to marry a Catholic. And so they had to do something about it, so they had her committed to a mental institution for life. But then they found out that she had 6 friends who were prostitutes in the East End of London. And so they decided to murder them. And the murders were carried out by Sir Charles Warren, his good friend Lord Randolph Churchill, the father of Winston Churchill, and Sir William Gull, who was the king's physician. And they didn't want the police to come up with any evidence and bring it, to the attention of the press or the public. And so as it is today with both the judicial branch of government in this country, and the same with law enforcement in this country and in Europe, you don't get very far unless you're a high-ranking Mason. And so they did the murders in a manner that any police officer who witnessed the scene would know immediately that these were Masonic murders and to look the other way. And this person, Sir Charles Warren, is Jack the Ripper. But he is very important because he appointed as his chief of criminal investigation Sir Robert Anderson. And Sir Robert Anderson was a member of the Royal Alpha Lodge, which was the only members were members of the royal family and their immediate friends. And Sir Robert Anderson was one of the founders of Darbyism. And all Christian fundamentalists are Darbyites, and I want to go into that in the workshop. It's very important, the belief structure. And back to the Dead Sea Scrolls, one of King Herod's chief advisors was a very senior Essene by the name of Menahem. And so as a result of this, Herod held the Essenes in very, very high esteem. The scrolls were found in Wadi Qumran. Wadi is an Arabic term for a dry riverbed. Next slide, please. In 1951, the Dominican Catholic priest Father Roland Devoe and 15 helpers commenced excavations among the ruins at Qumran, which ran until about 1956. Then he set up a team of experts to decipher the scrolls. And unfortunately, being Catholic, he didn't want any Jews on the team. And for many years, Jews were excluded from any scholarship appertaining to the Dead Sea Scrolls, which was a tragedy. This is the Dead Sea. Here is Khirbet Qumran, or Wadi Qumran. It's right here. This is the actual wadi, or dry riverbed. Another important area we'll discuss in the workshop is Ain Feshka, which is here. It's about a mile down from the Wadi Qumran. And Ain Feshka was an oasis. Very important. Here is the Jordan. Now, if you notice, I didn't say River Jordan. Nowhere in the Bible does the term River Jordan occur. But the term Jordan occurs 196 times. And the reason for that is that why it's not called a river, because it isn't a river, it's just a very wide stream. And I'll show some pictures of this in the workshop, so you'll see what the Jordan's all about. In fact, you can drown there if you go waist deep into the Jordan, because the Jordan drops about 9 feet every mile, so it's very, very fast flowing. And you get yourself into trouble there if you wade in the water too deep. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is the Wadi Qumran down here. Here are some of the caves that the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in. Here are the ruins up here. Behind it is a recent visitors' shelter and center, and they've drilled a well, so they have water now, and that's why you have some trees back here. But at the site of the so-called monastery, as you see, it's just a barren, very, very arid plateau. And it's the last place you'd want to live. Very hot and no water. The only water supply they have was rainwater that was stored in cisterns. Next slide, please. Yeah, some of the, you can't quite see, it's a little too dark. Here's one cave here. There was some more up here where the scrolls were found by the two Bedouin herdspeople. Next slide. Yeah, here's cave number 4. This wasn't the original opening. Father DeVoe's team opened it up more so it's easy access. But the whole point with these caves, if they hid these scrolls because in the caves, just to hide them from the Roman troops in AD 66, these caves are so visible, it would be ridiculous to hide them there. It'd be easy to find the scrolls. Yet other wadis between there and Jerusalem, the caves were specially modified by the zealots, so you couldn't see the entrances, and that would have been the obvious place to hide scrolls. Next slide, please. Again, now look at the height from the down here. Here are the actual ruins, or part of them. This, they call this a well, but it isn't. It's one of the cisterns right here. Next slide, please. Let's look at the evidence and archaeological evidence at Qumran. And then in the workshop, we'll go through it piece by piece, which will show you that the Essenes or no other sectarian group would ever dream of being there, and in no way was it a monastery. And then, of course, what we've got to do is to find out the purpose for all this evidence, why it's there, and what Qumran was really used for, and why the scrolls were ever put in the caves. And it's a detective story, really. What are these? These two circular stone slabs. They can't be millstones for grinding corn because there are no grooves in them. They obviously look like the bases for columns. Problem is, where are the columns? And that's the thing we've got to find a reason for. And we'll do that in the workshop. You get the same thing at Stonehenge. A lot of people assume at one time it was a complete circle of trilithons. It never was, and they assume that the stones on the ground were part of the upright stones. They're the wrong shape. They were deliberately put there because they emitted a specific energy field. And I only lived a few miles from Stonehenge, and I always froth at the mouth when I see these photographs of or pictures of a complete circle at Stonehenge. Never was like that. There is a reason why you've got column bases there and no columns. And of course, columns don't walk away; they're too heavy. Next slide, please. Now, according to the geographer Pliny the Elder, now he lived 23 to 79 AD, so he was a contemporary of some of the later Essenes. And what he wrote in his book, Natural History, and I'll quote it, on the west side of the Dead Sea is the solitary tribe of the Essenes, which is remarkable beyond all other tribes in the world, as it has no women, and it has no money, and has only palm trees for company. Lying below the Essenes was formerly the town of En-Gedi, second only to Jerusalem in the fertility of its land, but now, like Jerusalem, a heap of ashes. Now, he wrote that in AD 77, which is after the Romans destroyed Qumran and destroyed Jerusalem. And as I mentioned, the only source of water. Oh, I should mention, in fact, since Pliny mentioned that the Essenes were living with only palm trees for company, obviously they weren't living on this arid plateau because it wouldn't support any plant growth. So where do they reside? They're obviously, Pliny said they were in the Wadi Qumran. Where were they? We'll look at that. And there's an obvious place where they were. This is a site plan of Qumran, as it finally was, about 85,000 square feet, which is pretty big. The first portion of it was this, and they had this so-called well, which, as I said, was actually a cistern for collecting rainwater. Over here are latrines. That's very important to our narrative. Here was a tower, probably only about 2 stories high. What was the tower for? So this was basically the first portion, and then at a later date, the rest of it was added on, the so-called monastery. And over here in the pantry, there were several hundred dishes, but again, we only had 2 inkwells. If they took the inkwells with them, why didn't they take the dishes? Or was it a case that they only needed 2 inkwells because there was possibly only a couple of clerical people there, and the Essenes were never there? That's the thing we'll have to look at. Now, one thing they don't have at Qumran, and it should be there if the Essenes were ever there, is the Essenes laundered their garments in shallow troughs in the ground. They were sort of clay-lined, and they would just put the water in there and do their laundry. But the problem there was that they always applied frankincense to their linen garments. And when you launder a linen garment that has frankincense scents on it, then you'll leave a deposit of calcium carbonate at the bottom of the bowl. And there's no deposits of calcium carbonate. So again, we've got to find a place somewhere in Wadi Qumran where there are palm trees and deposits of calcium carbonate. You'll see where that is in the workshop. Another problem is, see, the Essenes, it was really a behavior modification group, and so they were sticklers for ritual purity, and ritual bathing was one of the key things they did. And to have a ritual bath, you had to have flowing water. Now, you could have even rainwater, but you'd have to get some spring water or water from a flowing river to add to it. And of course, that would be a horrendous problem here up on this plateau when there's no flowing water. So again, that is more evidence that the Essenes were never there. Again, what we've got to do is to find a place in the Wadi Qumran where there are springs. And we've got to find the calcium carbonate. We've got to find the remains of buildings and palm trees. And we'll do it. Now, I don't know if I brought it here. Yeah. Okay. What's wrong with this statement? Now, this is a graphic example of be very careful of doing research from the internet. I never do, because most research material is third or fourth hand, and I always work from first principles. This is why what you're hearing today, this is the very first time anybody's ever done an analysis of Qumran from first principles. And this is where all the biblical scholars have gone wrong. And this is a commentary I did pull off the net for you on Qumran. And this is an article written by the Judaica Society, a very, very prestigious international organization devoted to a study of Qumran. And they sponsor major exhibits of Qumran articles all over this country, like at the Smithsonian and places like that, the National Archives. And this, what they state, and what's wrong with this statement? Archaeological and historical evidence indicates that the excavated settlement at Qumran was founded in the second half of the 2nd century BC, during the time of the Maccabees. Anybody know what's wrong with that? Okay, what it is they're off by about 700 years. Qumran, this whole portion here, was built in the reign of King Uzziah in the 8th century. And King Uzziah is very pivotal to knowing what Qumran was really built for. And so again, if you rely on internet information, you'd never find it out. Next slide, please. How are we doing for time? Thank you. This is a mikvah, or a ritual bath, that the type the Essenes would have used. This is in the old city of, so-called city of David in Jerusalem. Here are the steps going down. This portion, the front portion, is being broken away. The sad thing is, look at all the garbage. It's appalling, because they were the Israeli government was given millions of dollars to preserve a lot of their historical artifacts in Jerusalem, and yet this is appalling. There's cans down here. I think it's terrible. Next one, please. Now, there were some exceptions to the scholars claiming that Qumran was occupied by the Essenes. And there are only 3 of them. One was Dr. Norman Kolb, and he claimed it was a fortress. And I'll show you reasons why in the workshop why it wouldn't have been a fortress. And the other 2 were the husband and wife biblical team of scholars. They were Belgian scholars, Pauline and Robert Doncil-Voutey. What they said was it was a villa built by or built for a very wealthy person. Now, let's think about that. If you had a lot of money and you wanted to build a villa, would you build it on top of a very arid plain? And I should point out that on the north end of the ruins, there's a cemetery with over 1,000 graves. And incidentally, the graves, or most of them, are oriented north to south, whereas Jews were buried east to west. So again, that's some more evidence we'll look at. What is the reason for that? And so, anyway, this is what these 2 scholars are claiming, that this was a very expensive villa. Now, again, I think if you were wanted to build somewhere in the Wadi Qumran, would you select that place or this? This is further down the Wadi Qumran. Look at it, it's beautiful foliage. It's an oasis, you know, running water. And so I think we can dispense with their theory right there. I don't know why they didn't think this through a little further. The Dead Sea Scrolls belong to 3 different time periods. Small group of the manuscripts were biblical ones dating from 250 to 150 BC. A very large group of the scrolls were non-biblical, and they were written in the Hasmonean period, 150 to 30 BC. And a large corpus of the manuscripts were written between 30 BC and 70 AD. Now altogether there were about 800 scrolls discovered in a total of 11 caves at Qumran, and then literally tens of thousands of fragments of scrolls in the caves. Also, very important, in cave number 4, we had broken pottery, and then we also had date pits. And the date pits, surprisingly, are key to telling us why the scrolls were deposited in the caves. Next slide. These are very special pots made specially for putting scrolls in for a specific purpose, which I'll tell you about. And it's the broken pottery of this type that was found at Qumran. Another piece of evidence, in the ruins, they found one of these pots filled with chicken bones. And there's a reason for it. So this is all the type of evidence that all the biblical scholars, hundreds and hundreds of them who specialize in Qumran, have missed. And it's incredible. Now, contrary to claims made by New Age authors, the Essenes were not spiritually evolved people. And they were actually very ultra-conservative, bigoted chauvinists. And for instance, people that were crippled or blind or had any other deformities were never allowed to become Essenes. And they had a hierarchy, typical cult, behavior modification cult. And basically it was divided into 2 grades, out of body and in the body, according to the scrolls. If you were out of body, that meant you were celibate. And if you're in the body, then you're either having sexual relations with a woman or a man, I suppose, or you were married, in which case you immediately lost your status and you were relegated to the status of a servant. And they also had a grade for animals, which was the lowest of all, and women were graded down there. It's called the beast grade. And so basically, one of the scrolls states that the reason for this is that women were harbingers of evil. And so that only goes to substantiate whichever woman since the time of Eve knows all men are pigs, isn't it? But we've got an excuse, you see, that it's something to do with our genes. They're not quite right, so that's our excuse. But the Essenes, they really were not nice people. And yet all these New Age authors who would have us believe, they're very spiritually evolved people. They weren't. Yeah, in the workshop, we'll discuss how the Essenes and similar sectarian groups came to be created. I'll give you something to ponder about. Another of the reasons the Essenes became Essenes, that bearing in mind they were originally priests in the temples, and they became so enraged with the state of things that they left. One of the reasons was that during the Hellenistic period, when the Greeks were, such as Antiochus, King Antiochus and his successors were ruling over Judea, one way you could become upwardly mobile if you were a very poor Jew was to compete in athletic events. The problem is all the athletic events were dedicated to the god Zeus. And then, horror of horrors, for the temple priesthood, all games had to be competed in the nude. And also, most business events and transactions would take place in the baths, the public baths, in the nude. But the problem is, to the Greeks, this wasn't offensive. This was perfectly normal. And the big problem is, the thing that was totally offensive to any Greek was for a man to be circumcised. Now, all the Jews, of course, were circumcised at the age of 8. So how did they get around this? How did they, participate in business in the nude, participate in athletic events in the nude when they were circumcised? How did they conceal their circumcision? I'll leave that to you to ponder. I'll tell you in the workshop. It's very interesting how they got around it. It's something I'd never have thought of. And also, there's two words involved with that, which George W. Bush would have a problem with, probably, with his pronunciation, but I'll tell you what it is. But just, now, in what we'll do in the workshop as well, we're not just going to be talking about the Essenes and the Dead Sea Scrolls. I'll tell you all about it, why they were in the scrolls were there, where the Essenes were, and then to understand more about why the Essenes were a body of people, we have to go way back to the origin of the Israelites, and I'll go right through from the origin of the Israelites, which again, you'll find my research is totally at variance with all accepted biblical scholarship, where all the biblical scholars say the Israelites began as pastoralists, herdspeople, etc., and it wasn't that way at all. And they've missed some major archaeological data. And then from there, we'll go forward into the New Testament and into the book of Revelation. I've never heard a Christian fundamentalist could tell me what Revelation was about. They've completely misunderstood. Also, the audience that the author of Revelation was addressing is a very specific audience, and you can tell this from very, very specific literary ploys written into the text, which scholars seem to have missed. And there's one very important group of people that the author was addressing. He wasn't really getting into prophecy at all. So we'll go through that, and in fact in the workshop, if we have time, that continues then into who created Christianity and why. And this involves the gold trade that was controlled by the Druids in Britain for the whole of the Celtic Commonwealth. And so if we have time, we'll go into that. And that would then take us into King Arthur, which again is garbage, what you read about King Arthur. It was actually a synthesis of two different people living 5 centuries apart. And so it's a logical progression. We open this theological can of worms when we get into the Dead Sea Scrolls. It takes us a lot of different areas. So I hope many of you will be attending the workshop, and we will get further as well into the business of the Temple Mount, why they want to blow it up, who's doing it, and why. So thank you all for coming today, and I hope to see most of you this evening. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.